it's always the toughest part's always starting, right? So I'll just dive into it. I know a lot of you guys here are already familiar with the overall structure of today, and I'll try not to go on too many tangents, as most all you know, I'm perfectly able to do. I think everybody here knows who I am, Stephen Fillmore, the Forest Fuels Officer, or will be the Forest Fuels Officer in a few more days again, actually. And the lead instructor for this class, although we have other instructors for this class here today too, which I'll introduce. The goal today is twofold. One is it's the final presentations day. So the fuels curriculum students, most of which are over here, and then the other ones are somewhere. Hey, Andy. Thanks for coming in. Another guy. Where you at? The goal today is for the students who got assigned a group project. This program that I handed out is the 3 group projects that they were assigned. Students divide it up into 3 groups where it's tasked with this assignment. They've been working on it for 5 or 6 months now. And so, well, I gave them the assignment 5 or 6 months ago. Okay, that's a little more legit. And then, of course, today is their final presentation. And the objectives for the presentation are given, of course. I know a lot of you guys are graduates, so you're familiar with that. And then after we're done with it's 3 groups this year. After we're done with the 3 groups, we'll move into the graduation ceremony, which is, our opportunity to acknowledge their hard work. So again, I appreciate you guys attending again. I really do. I'd like to point out, actually, have the graduates of the class. I always like to have them raise their hand, the alumni. I think that's a great showing. I really appreciate you guys coming too and supporting the folks that have gone through it. And then I don't think we need to do a full intros. Do you guys? Do you want to do introduction? We don't want to do introduction. Do you want to introduce yourself?
We're going to take you to charm school.
Well, the students themselves will introduce themselves. How about at the time? How about anybody who's not a fuels curriculum student currently? How about you introduce yourselves for them? And because then the students themselves will have a chance to introduce themselves.
AJ, go ahead.
So yeah, who's that start with? 10 in the corner, right?
Chip Gray, Battalion 32.
Right.
AJ Kleinschmidt on the Palomar Hot Shots.
Jerry Hayes, DCC manager. I think it's a student.
John Talcio, Palmer Hot Shot.
Not yet.
I'm Dana Beret, I'm Detail Patrol 32.
Jamie Miller, Fuels 43.
Chris Matthews, Engine Captain, BLM, Salt Wilson.
Cole Weisgerber, Fields 23.
Way back there. Yep.
Ace Zaragoza, Palomar Hot Shots. Wes Woodard, Palomar Hot Shots.
Charles Sixton, Engineer 39.
Andrew Miner, Fuels 5, BDF.
Fuels 5. And
Clay Howe, BLM rep here today.
we got 2 BLMers. We can double the amount of
Good morning, Charlie, Division 4.
Stan Hill, Superintendent 3.
Dan O'Connor, Fuel Prevention, San Bernardino.
All right, cool. Thank you all.
Order.
What's that?
Saying hi.
Oh, okay. Let's see. So I think what we'll do is pretty much jump right into the first presentation, which is going to be Group 1. Let's see, I'm trying to think. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I think we're good. Yeah, I think we'll just get right into the first presentation. So where's my Group 1? Is that Lorenzo? Is that your group?
I don't even know.
I got 3 groups, so it's my capacity.
I love you all the same.
I love you all the same.
Chief Lorenzo?
Yeah.
Oh, so many demands.
Oh, must be a chief.
Good heavens. Yeah, there you go. What else do you want me to do? I would be happy to hand this out. Oh, actually, I do have it. It's right there, not that long. I even wrote it all out. Alright, guys. Kill it. Thank you. I'm serious. I'm actually better.
Either or.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Oh, well, what? Come on, Fuels class, wake up. Good morning. Morning. Thank you. Gee, thanks. All right. We're going to be talking about non-federal lands funding. So before I dive too much into it, I kind of want to set the tone beforehand. So I'm going to read a little quote here. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Now, who has heard the term, no man is an island? Am I the only person that reads? Oh, good job, Jason. Thank you. So what does that mean? Well, what does that mean that no person is an island? I get some help from this side of the audience here. The Wake Park. Come on, Jason.
You're not in it by yourself. There's other people around you that support you.
So are we talking about just in the neighborhood right next to you at Ray, or are we talking about the whole world? What are you talking about then?
I think it could go all the way to the whole world. Your neighborhood and the whole world.
It's very true. This is indicative of not just one person, but the humankind, human race. So if we're talking about effects, we're not talking about just directly like if I punched Ray and then Ray feels hurt. I mean, that's one way that I'm affecting him. But the way that we eat, the way that we consume things, the way our air pollution is, I mean, all these things affect. As much as we want to be separate from the whole, as much as that we want to be away from the entire continent, we are connected. That's who we are as a human race. The things that we do, the actions that we take, are not in a vacuum. They affect everyone. And in this, it's not so much that our agency is an island. Our agency is very much part of the entire continent. Our agency, the Forest Service, our intention is to be an island. You look at our name, the Forest Service. You look at our motto. You look at our mission statement. It's all forest-centric. It's all the things that we say we're going to do, we're going to be doing for the forest. That's our main mission. That's our thing that we try to do. Nowadays, it's not the same. It's not the same of what's expected from us. Back in 1905, when we were founded, it was easy to say that. It was easy to say we were going to take care of the forest, and that's all we're going to do. Because back then, those needs were to make sure that the forest was looked after and to just have it there. I mean, back in those times, it was timber. It was timber sales, it was natural resources, and those things weren't protected. So now we have laws, now we have legislation in place. But things have changed. To access the forest back then, it used to take days or weeks or whatever back in 1905 to reach the forest, to recreate, to do those things. Today is different. Today you can be there in a matter of hours, a matter of minutes if you live next to it. People are living near the forest, they have businesses near the forest, they have different wants and desires from their experience with the forest. So no longer are we set apart, aside from everything else. We're a part of the community. We are part of the world at large for these people. And when they venture to the forest, they want to experience that and have those protections and have these things that we have today. And now looking back in 1905 to now, it's a whole different standard we're being held accountable to, of what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. No longer are we an island, but we have to incorporate today's principles and today's standards to what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish.
We'll start with intros. With that being said, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Aaron Dukas. I work down at Scanso at Cameron Station, and I went and talked with, I phone called a Fire Safe Council, Pine Valley Fire Safe Council called in, and we all each individually contacted different Fire Safe Councils or people.
I think you might need to back up a little bit. What we're trying to do today? What's our focus?
And the thesis?
The thesis, yeah.
For, okay, well, we'll do that. So the thesis was, this whole project that we did was centered around non-fed land and the funding, because of that, what tied into the island, and we're touching other lands. So the policy and management implications was with the National Cohesive Strategy, of course, pulling that together. And then we go into non-fed lands money, and then from there, we how we decided, we gathered info and got basically a questionnaire together, and then decided what questions to ask these certain people, and what questions on those we decided, got that list together, and then each one of us contacted certain people with those questions.
You go back to introduce yourself again.
And the introduction, go into that part. Aaron, like I said, and my expectations from the get-go when I first heard about the non-fed lands money, just from the smallest side of it, I live in the community that does border the forest, and so I had heard that Fire Safe Council, you know, they have the free chipping sign, or the tree trimming, or we'll cut your tree down for this X amount of money. And that was the smallest level I knew of it. I didn't really understand the depth or just how big it really is. So that was my initial thoughts on it.
Who's next?
And then next I'll go.
I'm Sarah Billings, and I am off of the Plumas National Forest, and Stephen gave me the opportunity to come down here, participate in the Fuels Free Deal, so I had an opportunity to learn about what you guys deal with in Southern California, you know, versus Northern California. So I have a little bit of knowledge on non-federal lands from the Fire Safe Council side, attending Fire Safe Council meetings up in Northern California, so it was interesting to see how non-federal lands are used down here and across the region.
Okay, I'm Co Bruce. I'm off the Descanso District. I work at Mount Laguna. When I first initially learned about the Fuels Crew, I see everybody else in the district talking about it. It's something I always wanted to do, so I was grateful for the opportunity to do this. And so when we're choosing our group projects, this one stood out to me because I've always had an interest in passion for working with the public. I saw this as a great little business, especially working with fed lands, so us and non-fed lands, so our surrounding districts, other agencies, state, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to get in contact with Fire Safe Councils. As a passion I've always had, I wanted to do this, but I never had the motivation or the reason to do it. And this project gave me the opportunity to do so. And you know, I thought I'd learn a lot more about grants and policies and the way that things work, and that was what I was hoping to get out of the project.
My name is Lorenzo Miranda. Currently, I'm a dispatcher here in the Cleveland National Forest. With this project, when I was looking at it, I was reading through a bunch of policies, a bunch of mission statements, and a big cohesive strategy. And it sounded like a lot of, I wouldn't say just conjecture or just like warm, fuzzy thoughts. I mean, to me, we're all here for a common goal. We're all trying to do something together. And the big picture is that we all want this to work. So for me, my expectation is that I thought that it would work. I thought it functioned, but how well did it function, I wonder? How well did this work with other agencies? I know from dispatch perspective, working with other agencies on the collective goal, sometimes it's very hard. And sometimes things fall through the cracks, and I wonder, in this process, what were those cracks? What were those weak things that we had to strive and get through? And I'm sure, like, I didn't know that much about this subject, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know off the top of their heads what NFL money is. They think, you know, football players. So with that, you know, that's what my expectations were, that there was people working behind the scenes doing this stuff, but what were they doing and how were they doing it? Okay, so as we get through this, we're gonna explain some big definitions and some policies and things that we use, or people that do non-federal lands grants will use. So just do some straight definitions to make things out in the open. Don't fall asleep over there if you guys can, okay? All right, the FLAME Act. Now, the FLAME Act kind of leads right into the cohesive strategy, pretty much like the prequel to the cohesive strategy. So it was in 2009, and the Congress wanted that we develop a cohesive fire management strategy. And it addressed some specific areas, and pretty much is kind of led to the cohesive strategy. Go ahead, next one, please. So the National Cohesive Strategy. The vision is to safely and effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire when allowable, and manage our natural resources of the nation, to live with wildland fire, and be happy and great with your neighbors, and have a great day. The cohesive strategy is just a strategy that it's an ideal, it's a value, it's not really a policy that we can manage. To me, when I read the document's quite large. It's a big volume of talking about working well with other people, communicating, doing our part within the communities, working working with, with no borders. And it's a great document to read. I like it. It's great stuff. It's inspirational, but it makes me wonder when I read it, how operational is it? How do we do that? How do we govern it? A lot of ways I look at it as kind of like NATO. So we have NATO established for all the countries to kind of have to come together to be able to kind of police themselves. But NATO is not an army within itself. NATO is not a governing body. It's not a country. It's just an organization of people. And that's what the cohesive strategy is. It's telling people, this is what we want. We want people to work together, to have these common strategies, to have these common factors. We should work together. It shouldn't be any boundaries. We're all in a common purpose. We share that same purpose. So we should be together in that purpose. A lot of that is asking people to drop ego. A lot asking people to drop, their own policies, so they can work together and to attack something together. I think the cohesive strategy is only as strong as those people that want to be a part of it. If people want to achieve these things, then it'll happen. It'll work out. We'll work together as an agency. We've done it together in fire. I'm sure we'll do it in fuels. But it takes that type of interaction between groups, between us, between them, whoever them is, between the public. We need to have all those people function together with that common want, with that common desire. Go ahead. Okay, this is the last part of it. Okay. So this is part of the strategy. It says, talking about what's been happening with the fire service, the challenges, and what it really wants to be. It wants to be a thing that works in Maine, a thing that works in North Carolina, something that works in California. And basically, it's not something specific. It really isn't. The strategy is not specific to any one place. It's just saying you need to communicate with neighbors, and you need to work well for the common good. That's essentially what that 50-page document says. And it makes sense. It makes sense to have something in place like that people can see. But the only challenge I see with the cohesive strategy is that there's no big boss behind it. There's no big stick. It's pretty much the honor system, hoping that everyone sees the common good.
So we'll go right into the Stevens funds after that, and there's the Stevens funds and a few other different ways that people get funds. So the Stevens fund on July 12, 2001, Senator Stevens and Byrd addressed the Senate proposing that funds be available to land adjacent federal lands to protect them from hazard reduction activities. So if there was if you're having a prescribed fire next to a community, and then that money was given to the community to protect it from us getting, fire or whatever into their property, for them to work their property to protect it from us, basically. And initially, it was the appropriation was allowed up to $15 million to be spent on adjacent lands to protect them from the fuel reduction activities, like it said here. And this was prompted from an escaped fire in Alaska, I believe it was. And in 2012, the appropriation language was modified, removing reference to adjacent lands and directing the purpose away from protecting communities from hazard reduction activities. So it started from 2002 to 2011 was exactly that. So the money was used on adjacent non-fed lands for the purpose of protecting communities, like we were saying. And then in 2012 to 2014, it changed again, saying that it may be used by the Secretary of Agriculture to enter into contracts and agreements and grants. So basically they gave that secretary the ability to kind of just dish it out where needed, not just for the community, but it could be also for the fed land and non-fed lands, determining on what the secretary said, for grants for fed and non-fed. So that example that I used, like the chipping or the tree removal, those types of ideas was from that Stevens Fund. And then straight into another way was the Wyden's. It is the Wyden Fund. And the Wyden Amendment is the public law, of course, all those sections, and look it up then. And so that authorizes the Forest Service to enter into cooperative agreements with willing participants for the protection, restoration, and enhancement of fish and wildlife habitat and other resources on public or private land, and for the reduction of risk from natural disaster or public safety is threatened that benefits the resources within the water system. So kind of like that Stevens Fund, but then it throws in the restoration and protection as well. And so the Wyden Fund agreement, it may be either A, directly with willing landowners, or B, indirectly through an agreement with a state, local, or tribal government, or other public entities, education institutions, or private nonprofit organizations. And it protects the projects that protect, enhance, or restore resources within a watershed and provide tangible benefits to achieving Forest Service goals and objectives are allowable under the Wyden Fund. So it's kind of more of like a broader way to look at it. And, you know, it's the agreement, or, you know, the amendment. So that's really what I have on that one. And then the Good Neighbor Authority. So that 2014 and the Farm Bill, those are two different ones. That's why it's under there. So the Good Neighbor Fund, the authority allows the Forest Service and BLM to enter into cooperative agreements or contracts nationally to perform forest, rangelands, and watershed restoration services on federal and non-federal lands. And the GNA, the Good Neighbor Authority, allows for a broad range of forest, rangeland, and watershed restoration services. Project planning, including environmental analysis, project preparation work, treatment areas design and layout, and sale preparation, field reduction, commercial timber removal, and all the rest there. And so there were two different ones, like I was saying, the Farm Bill, and that permanently authorizes the Good Neighbor Authority for both Forest Service and BLM. And that Farm Bill, it cannot be used for construction, reconstruction, repair, or restoration of paved or permanent roads or parking areas in the wilderness, or it can't be used in the wilderness as well. It's kind of interesting, the name of it, the Good Neighbor Authority. It's exactly that. They're all trying to be good neighbors to each other. Kind of going back to what Lorenzo said at the very beginning, how no one's one island is kind of what popped into my head when I was reading about it. And then the other one on there, that 2014, that's fiscal year 14, is the Appropriation Act. And that includes a 5-year authorization for the use of GNA in all states with non-fed land. And there's no exclusion as to type or location of work. And it can be used for road reconstruction work in connection with other restoration uses. So it can be used in road work, but it has to be with the use for restoration as well. So that's where the two different, Good Neighbor has that two different, fiscal year 2014 and the Farm Bill. That's kind of how it's broken down.
Well, what do you see in these plans that we presented? It's very much the same concept. You can work with other agencies, you can work with other entities, you can work with the public, and it gives us that leeway. And there's a range of how much leeway that we have. A lot of these I've noticed, there's different versions as they go into service and go out of service. What I've noticed is that sometimes they don't incorporate roads. Roads, restoration, landmarks, homes, that kind of thing. They kind of exclude that for the majority. As Aaron was talking about for the Farm Bill, there is authorization to 2018 that you can include roads and restoration with that. And there is more, then let me preface this. What we have here is pretty much like the quick hits about each one, each policy. Each one of these is a tool that someone can use. And when you look up these policies, there is a laundry list more of information that's included. Even in our report, it's like 18 pages, and there's a lot more that's connected to these policies and that. And it goes into cost share, it goes into who's supposed to do what, how it's supposed to go. And a lot of the language is very broad. I'm sure as government employees, I don't understand that kind of language. It allows us to kind of make things work as we see fit, to make these fit, the projects that we have, the things that we're trying to achieve. So these things are malleable. We can use them for our purposes, but we have to understand what the rules of the engagement are. And most of these are very much the same of what we're trying to achieve. You work with your partners, work with the people around you. And they give us this leeway. Like Aaron was talking about before, the first one, the Stevens Fund, was given because of prescribed fire that escaped. And what happened in the community was the fire escaped and then went to adjacent lands, and those adjacent lands weren't ready for the fire. So because of that, they're like, how come this wasn't prepped? How come this wasn't ready? And, you know, pretty much the answer is that's not my responsibility, right? I did the forest stuff. I did, you know, BLM, I did my agency, but that went somewhere else. And so because of that, that's where these policies come from. But remember, these are just tools. These are just tools in the toolbox that people can use. There are several other definitions. These are not the end-all, be-all to all the policies, all the tools. You can spend all day, all week looking for policies and looking for things that work. But these are basically the same. They're kind of the same general thing that they're trying to do. And just understand that. If you're going to be using this kind of stuff, it's out there. The framework is there. Whatever we know about it is a different issue.
And so that was kind of the background of, you know, all of this policy and how to interpret this policy. And so we compiled these 5 questions to survey non-federal lands money users. And we surveyed close to 20 individuals, anywhere from fuels officers to forest fire management officers to district fire management officers, fire safe councils, and people responsible for distributing non-federal land monies. So question 1, have you used non-federal land monies, and if so, in what forms? The major form that we saw used, this is kind of in ranking order, was Stevens funds. Everyone is pretty familiar with Stevens funds. There was a couple individuals that used the Secure Rural Schools funds, and I'm not very familiar with it. I think it's pretty specific to Northern California, where there's a lot of rural lands. The Getting Farmer program, and that was outside of California that we saw a lot of that used. Grants awarded to tribes for fuels projects, and those were non-specific. They didn't really elaborate on what kind of grants and how that funding got to them specifically. And the state terrestrial wildlife grant was from someone in a national park in Florida. And then agreements for underburning and mechanical treatments on private and public lands. And this was using, like Lorenzo said, other agencies working in collaboration to burn across those private and public land boundaries. And then we had someone from the regional office who's responsible for facilitating the distribution of non-federal land monies. And so how successful were these people at using non-federal land monies, and why? We had a whole varying degrees of success, from being super successful to being we were not successful at all. And so these were kind of the successful consensus as to why they were successful. Having partners that were engaged and communicate well, having partners that have staff with NEPA to help with NEPA and CEQA requirements. A lot of fire safe councils and stuff don't have permanent staff, but if you can partner with an NGO that has some sort of permanent staff, it's a lot easier to get those NEPA requirements done. And having partners that model their project after the funding source. And that's basically being in communication with those partners and telling them, hey, there's this money out there, and if you can model a project to fit this funding source, you're more likely to get that money to get your fuels work done. And then internally, a lot of people said from within the agency, if you have a strong relationship with your grants and agreements folks, it pays dividends. If you cannot communicate well and you can't communicate the intent with your grants and agreements folks, it's a really tough process. Having specialists willing to take on additional work to make sure NEPA projects are compliant. So like it said on the previous slide, whenever you're dealing with these non-federal lands monies, it needs to be NEPA compliant and not just CEQA compliant. And a lot of, we work as the government, and so we're familiar with what the NEPA requirements are. And so, getting your specialists on board to help make sure those projects are compliant and reviewing the documents, especially for partners that don't have the permanent staff, that was a really good way to be successful. And also having NEPA done on adjacent public lands. This is making that island connect. If we have NEPA on one chunk of land and we have neighbors of private land, and we can cross those boundaries, why not? And if you guys have any questions and want me to elaborate on any of these, please let me know. And then we get into the varying degrees of success. NEPA requirements can be difficult if partners don't have the staff, like I kind of touched on before. If you're dealing with Fire Safe Council, these are usually people that are volunteers. They're taking time out of their personal lives. They're not getting really paid to do this kind of stuff. And it's kind of their own time and effort, and stumbling through a process that they're not really familiar with can be difficult. Much of the budget can go to admin or NEPA. With a lot of these projects, they get funding and they think it's all going to be for implementing the project, and it turns out you need to pay people to do NEPA and to do admin. They don't want to do that stuff for free. Cost reimbursements agreements can be difficult for partners with not a lot of capital. We saw, one of the individuals that we interviewed, he was working with a partner who had a great project, and it had limitless potential, but they had no capital to get the project going, and they kind of stumbled through getting that capital, and they ended up having to take out a loan, and then getting that cost reimbursement is a process through grants and agreements, and can take anywhere from 3 weeks to a month. And when you don't have that money to start off with, and you don't know when you're going to get paid, that can be a whole process for starting work and stopping work, and lead to all kinds of varying degrees of success. And some more varying degrees of success internally, getting those grants and agreements personnel to understand what we're trying to do. So just again, have that open relationship with your grants and agreements folks. And difficult budgeting, it kind of plays into, what's the turnaround time for people getting paid. Unsuccessful stories. Partners unwilling to adapt their approach to projects to fit the source of funding. I talked with a couple fuels officers that they have fire safe councils that really want to do work, but they have a certain business model, very specific business model that doesn't really fit what the funding is, and so they wait and they wait and they wait, and projects get delayed for years and never implemented because they're not willing to adapt their approach. Personnel turnover, like I said, bless you. Personnel turnover, like I said, a lot of these fire safe councils, they're people that are here on their own time, and there are sometimes people that are retired, sometimes people get tired of the politics, so there's a lot of personnel turnover. Issues with trying to determine what kind of work to do. We all like to put fire back on the ground, but having those multi-tiered projects can be pretty difficult to implement, and what I think is right to do out on the land might not be what a private landowner thinks is right to do out on the land. And it sounded like a lot of people had problems getting CAL FIRE and other land management agencies involved to help implement prescribed fire. And I'll let you guys think what you want about that.
Did they have any reasoning behind that? Did they express why that was a challenge, or was it just?
Anywhere from CAL FIRE didn't return their phone calls to CAL FIRE just not wanting to be involved.
It really sounds like communication.
Yeah.
That maybe they don't understand what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, and they don't want to be during the phone call.
Yeah.
It comes down to what they want to do as an agency.
So question 3, tips and tricks for using non-federal land monies. These were kind of what were the highlights. Having those strong relationships with partners, and encouraging close coordination between your agency and the partner organization. So like I said before, that having that open door of communication and knowing what your intent is made for some really successful projects. Once again, becoming familiar with grants and agreements. Your grants and agreements personnel are there to help you, and so have that relationship with them. Make sure your partner knows that projects have to be NEPA compliant. Just to stress that again, just because we're not doing it on federal lands and we're doing it on private lands, we have to meet those federal land requirements because it's federal land money. Be ready to educate your line officer, NEPA planner, and specialist about NEPA requirements. So, this is having, communication within the agency and letting, your line officer know that to implement these projects, it's probably gonna take some of your specialist time. It's gonna take away from, getting public land work done on private land and getting them to buy into that.
So are the specialists, are they allocated a certain amount of money, or can they be allocated a certain amount of money to spend their time, get paid for it under that fund source so that they're,
Yes.
okay. So, because that would maybe take some of the
The stress of that
abrasiveness
off,
away
right?
from them not
Yeah.
wanting to do it.
Definitely. And like I said before, working with semi-professional partners that have a staff to take on those administrative and those NEPA duties takes a lot of stress off of, us as the agency. And I mean, we're always there to help guide them and help them meet those NEPA requirements, but having a staff that they can dedicate that time to helps people be successful. Be prepared for there to be significant communication at times. It's just, helping them understand the process and helping them be able to use the money. And it sounded like a lot of people needed some GIS help in some form or another. And once again, to stress, be very patient. Stress to your partners that this is going to be a process. It's not something that just takes a month, couple months. This can take a long time. And even the best laid projects can be delayed. And here, stay in contact with the regional office as funding becomes available so that partners have the projects with NEPA completed and are ready to go to work whenever funding becomes available. Make sure you have a solid proposed action before asking for monies. It's pretty hard to, come up with a project area and scramble when you're soliciting for proposals. So know what you want to do and it makes it a lot easier. Have working capital to use cost reimbursable agreements versus advances. Just like I said, if you don't have any money to go after, to start a project and you go after these cost reimbursable agreements, it can be difficult. And mechanical treatments work best. Like I said before, getting those other land management agencies to come help with prescribed fire can be difficult. But if you can get a contractor in there that can, mechanical thin or hand thin or chip, they get in there and they remove those fuels, and that takes a lot of the stress off there, and where you can, it changes that fire behavior in there. And if you're asking for monies for prescribed burning, make sure they're flexible with your accomplishments. And this goes back to those grants and agreements folks. Let them know what the intent of the project is. So if, we're all familiar with prescribed fire in here, you can't do it. It's hard to set a timeline for prescribed fire. You never really know when those windows are going to be. So if you can have, a flexible time frame for those accomplishments, and you can reflect that in the grants and agreements. Be organized. I know that's something I struggle with, and so it was a good reminder to be organized with what you have going on. Go out there and physically check on project process. Just because it's land, it's land being treated adjacent to public land, you should go out there and make sure that they're meeting the specifications on the private land that you want them to, or that your partner wants them to. Be prepared for a high cost per acre, but make sure that they're not taking advantage of the government. This is still government money, and so be prepared for it to cost a little more, because you're accounting for those administrative and those NEPA requirements on top of actually treating. And be careful of how many non-federal lands projects you take on. We're still responsible for what we do on public lands, and if you take on too many projects that are happening on private lands, that can hinder what you're trying to do with your fuels program. And be prepared that not all fire managers agree with non-federal lands projects. And I don't know how true this is, but one of the individuals I interviewed said that money for non-federal lands was taken off the WHF budget.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
So
Well, we've heard conflicting things.
yeah, she just stressed that, you know, a lot of fire managers think that that takes away from the money that we're able to do work on public lands.
Ostensibly, that'd be true. I mean, anything not get them to the unit. So.
I mean, really, I'm thinking this more affects with time. You know, the time that we take on this project would take away from possible public colleges.
Yeah. And the best way to get results is to produce more results. So it's kind of cyclical. If you can show people that you're accomplishing stuff, they're more likely to give you more money to accomplish more stuff. And how is working with partners? I kind of wanted to know, you know, what kind of entities are out there and what kind of responses people had. And this kind of is that those varying degrees of success where we have positive responses, positive experiences working with partners, where partners, they were the reasons that projects got done. They took on the challenge and they drove the project completely and communicated well. Like I said, enthusiastic about getting funds to implement fuels treatments. Tribes, a lot of tribes were really easy to work with. And working with local land trusts and community colleges for positive experiences for a couple individuals. Negative experiences, frustration with partners, and this goes back to people that were terrible at communicating, unresponsive, not wanting to follow the paperwork that was given to them, trying to take projects in different directions than what the intent was. Working with some fire safe councils could be frustrating because they have those specific business models in mind and they're not willing to change that business model to fit this funding source. Difficult getting the cooperation from each landowner, so you can have a community of 15 people and 12 are on board. Getting those last 3 are just a pain, and that puts a whole damper on the entire project. And once again, CAL FIRE, they don't seem to be interested in helping implement the prescribed fire across these borders. And so who else should we talk to about non-federal lands money? And this was more of a way for us to kind of chase that rabbit down the rabbit hole about who's using these non-federal land monies and how they're using them. And so this, led me talking to people in the regional office, talking to forest fuels officers, talking to fire safe councils. And we also got the opportunity for someone that came to class and presented to us about his experience, his personal experience using non-federal land money. And so I'm going to talk to you guys about that now. So Garth Crow, he's a engine operator down on the San Bernardino, and he moved to California recently, and he's been successful of using non-federal lands monies, coordinating NRCS grant dollars in a beginning farmer program. And he, just in his local community, has brokered close to $500,000 worth of fuels treatments, which I think is really impressive. And so this was kind of the process that he went to. He gathered all of his neighbors up and explained to them, hey, this is how we can get some money from the government to treat around our fire-prone landscape. And then he got an NRCS representative to come to a community meeting and explain the application process. And then the individual landowners had to apply through this process on their own. And once you're accepted into the program, NRCS will ask, the individual landowners for more documentation. And then coordinating with NRCS for landscape design and treatment objectives. And once these treatment objectives were all set, then the project got approved and they were funded quarterly. And so he set up several properties per batch, so it was his house and his neighbor's house, and they just kept moving through the canyon that he lived in.
But what's important from here is that what Garth was able to provide to the community was an idea of how this was supposed to look. So he, his job, he was a Forest Service employee. So as he did these projects, he understood what needed to happen for his community. So he was able to give that professional opinion to the community members. A lot of these communities don't have that. So they don't have that direction, and that's where a lot of these communities struggle, or can struggle. They don't have a person like Garth who understands the process and able to take that lead and really show these people what's supposed to happen and what will be the best way to utilize these resources to actually, give a product. So when there is fire in a community, it can actually, be useful. So a lot of these steps, you see communication. Communication is very important to all of them. And it's not like these steps take place within hours or days. This is a long process.
Right, and so this just kind of elaborates more on the step-by-step process. After, the landowner gets this funding, he has to hire a contractor, and the contractor completes the work, and then NRCS comes and inspects the work, and then NRCS sends the grant payment to the landowner, and then the landowner pays the contractor. So, it's a lot of connecting the dots, and like Lorenzo said, it's really having that flow of communication. And Garth said just this process, each quarterly batch takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months on average. And so Garth also had an experience when he lived in Utah, and this was under a different program. This came from the state of Utah Department of Natural Resources, and he was successful in 2 different programs. This was a 70-30 hard dollar match where he hired out a private contractor, and the private contractor performed mastication and handwork, and this was on land that wasn't necessarily in a community, but the state provided 70% of the funding, and he provided 30% of the funding for it. And this was on a contract $25,000 and below. And this was a 70-30 soft dollar grant. So Garth on his property had to perform 30% of light work, which was in the form of mastication or limbing or hand piling. And then after the state came and inspected that work, they've sent state fuels crews out to do the other 70% of the work. And so we also had the opportunity to talk with a forest fuels officer about how his process for using non-federal land monies. And so like Garth's process, it was step by step. So in March, he solicits for proposals from private nonprofits or landowners for Stevens Funds projects. He said sometimes nonprofits will bounce ideas and proposals off of the agency, and sometimes not. And then in April, once proposals are received, they get ranked according to how well they fit that national, federal, and non-federal land monies criteria. And then months and months and months go by, because this all is the middle of the fiscal year. And so once they get the proposals in, you have to have your budget of what you think you're going to accomplish in the next year. And these go along. This is why I guess you would assume that it's taken off the top of your budget, because it goes along with your budget to the regional office. Then in September, the regional office produces next fiscal year's regional direction, which includes information about which proposals will be awarded non-federal land funding. And in October, the contact with the nonprofits and private landowners who have been awarded funding projects. Then in November, parents send a pre-award letter to the awardee regarding all the other documentation that they need to fill out. And upon completion, in December and January, once the forms are received, the specifications and requirements go to the grants and agreements folks, and you start working through those grants and agreement process. And then in February and March, once the award letter is signed by all parties, and that's anywhere from the line officer to the FMO to all the private landowners that are going to be involved in that specific project, once those are all signed, then you can start submitting invoices and receiving funds for the project. And once the nonprofit or awardee has the award, they can begin work on required biological and archaeological surveys that are required by the NEPA process.
So easy, right?
Okay,
Then
so.
I'm gonna turn it over to Cole.
Okay, so like we said, we had a questionnaire developed, and our main means of talking to people was through emails and phone calls. I had no success with that. I tried different agencies, I was calling people, telling them a bag of excuses, before vacations, they leave, they do different things. And Europe was real tough, I didn't talk to anybody over there either. But I did find great success in actually attending fire safety councils. So, you know, I attended some well-known and active fire safety councils. I got invited to go to the Mount Laguna Fire Safety Council, which is actually in the heart of the Descanso district and direct link with our organization because the majority of them are cabin owners or they work with permanent buildings of ours. And the other one was, I later attended, was the Greater Alpine Fire Safety Council. It's on the west end of the Descanso district and they've been around a long time. And I've always heard their name but never got to meet anyone or talk to them. They're kind of always in the outskirts working with us. So here's just some of the projects. So about Laguna, I was giving some background information about the organization and what to expect when I was going up there. And somebody gave me a little interview how to conduct myself when I was there, considering that we're professional relationship with them, you know, meaning that we're only there as subject matter experts and not to cross that line of giving them information or bad information. So when I went to this meeting, it was with around 40 attendees. You know, it was from cabin owners, Forest Service cabin owners, the local fire department was up there, a flight nurse, local CAL FIRE, and then us too. So it was a real good representation of that cohesion, you know, that they were talking about that strategy, getting everybody involved, everyone do their part and wanting to be there. During this formal council meeting, they discussed length FS locations, fuel site disposal sites, equipment availability for reduction, appropriation for the members by grants and donations. They also did a little light CPR training, just basic, so we're talking about protection, getting involved. They're also talking about an upcoming Wildfire Community Preparedness Day, which I didn't get to attend. It was pretty big. It was last weekend, so hopefully it'll help in the future, and I'd like to go to that. It really sparked my interest, and this was actually where I was meeting my expectations for the project. Finally to go out there and talking to people, put a face to the name. It was very different than me talking to people and them giving me really short answers or, not really what I was looking for. The meeting took place over about 2 hours, in one of our permanent facilities that we're very familiar with. All members spoke with confidence and contributed. They appear to be active and longtime members, like they said before. These are retired people, these are their vacation homes. They're all kind of doing this on their own time and their own budget.
So they all have that personal buy-in
Yeah, so
for their community.
it's their home, they care about it, it's where they want to be, so they have that buy-in instead of working for somebody or some job where it's like, hey, just give me check points. Even after the meeting, I spoke with several people that are coming up talking to me, trying to get me to talk about other things. It's really hard to stay on topic. I enjoyed it, but they wanted to talk about stuff I had no idea about, and I had to be really careful. I can't be like, oh yeah, I know about that, just because they were trying to fish their information. So still being professional and sticking to my guidelines and stuff, especially being my first time with Oil Forum. I even haven't spoken in front of everybody, not the best public speaker, but I enjoyed it. Later I visited the websites. They had phenomenal websites, so we got even more information, which is designed for the public, so it's an outreach program for them. Which is real simple for somebody like us who are used to chipping, no big deal, pile burns, it's done all the time. They still need that basic information, where to go, what to do, what they're looking for. Take the plastic bags off the stuff or throw it in the dumpster. They need this stuff, and things we think are common sense aren't so common. I just have some of the projects up there, like we said, they want to produce a resilience, and so the good thing they do so they can get more funding. Ongoing education with Fire Safety Council, so they got campgrounds. They're talking about fighters coming and talking to people. They continue to apply brush cutting and weed whacking tools available for them. So a lot of these people are retired. They don't have chainsaws. They don't have wood bolt, they push mowers. I don't know. There's tons of old stuff up there. So they grant grants and they have information, these things available for them, so they can meet these standards that we're putting to them on our cabins. Keeping Fire Safety Council owned. Truck on the mountains, so that's a big thing. They really want to keep their volunteers up there, so that's part of their cohesion strategy. They really help them. They feel it's a great part. They've been there for a long time. They know them. They have a good established relationship, and they feel safe, and they like having them there. Keeping cabin owners current regarding Forest Service fire regulations, clearance. They're always having problems with cabins, but it's gotten better over the years. A little involvement with our patrol units. to making placing cabin numbers, markers, driveways to help us. And when we get reported to, I work up there, I still don't know where all the cabins are. Sometimes it goes from 38 to 40, and you're like, you skipped it, whereas in some back road they put in, and these are just trying to help us to help them, to get everybody on the same page like we're talking about that content. Not these little different pockets of cabins, everything's different, trying to be on the same page. I got some information from them off the website. So this isn't a FedLand grant, but it's an SGGE grant. It's specified for them to have a program or a dumpster place to get rid of. So they do all the programs, they cut all the stuff, and then it just sits there. You drive by, they have huge mounds, they can't burn it. But this grant working with us is we provide the facility for the dumpster and a place for them to take it. It used to be on the station, now it's by the Air Force Base. And even though this wasn't a grant, I think it was a good effort, and working with each other, maybe something they can make in the future for other projects. Okay. So they're also part of the Firewise organization. It's I got to do some. So we're talking about policy. I just barely got in the shallow end. It got overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, going too many different directions. But nationally recognized. They're talking about Flame Act. They're doing all these different standards to maintain this criteria. So they're active. They want to be, represented, and they're award winning. They say on the website they're award winning. I don't know what awards are, but I'm sure. So
The internet doesn't lie.
yeah, everything's true on the internet. But anyway, so they're meeting all these standards, producing results so they can get more grants, they can get more. Let's see. Continuing. So take this with a grain of salt, though. This was my first meeting, so it's not this great utopia of Fire Safe Council, the best thing out there. I felt great. I understand that they have their own personal objectives, and they're treating us like the White Hat. We work for Smokey Bear. We have a great relationship with them, but you can do 1,000 great things and do one bad thing, and all of a sudden, the one bad thing's going to be remembered. But trying to stay positive with that track record and staying with them. And it's early in the fire season, who knows? You might be Cherry 2 come, they lose some buildings, they might be mad, but hopefully nothing like that. But we still have that great relationship. And I think it's a great model of the cohesion strategy, what they're trying to tap on that small scale. Okay, so next was the Greater Alpine Fire Station. I felt great, went to the other one, like, all right, I'm motivated, I know what to look for. I look on the website, I find where it's at, I walk in, they stare at me like, I have no idea there. I'm the only attendee who's not on the board of council. They're kind of nervous and tentative. They're asking me, are you going to represent your agency? I'm like, no, I'm just here to get some information. I'm just an observer. I don't have to answer any questions. This is a real low level. Okay, so they kind of brought me to the board meeting, trying to get me to answer stuff, and I just kept, sticking to my guns. I don't know nothing, So, but completed fuel breaks. I've always seen these, but I've spent a lot of labor hours in these areas, and I had no idea that they're involved with them. Southern, Alpine, Vejas, Victoria Loop, Sweetwater. I have a map I'll put up here later, and I'll show it. But so I was there, and like a lot of times, they had some great things. This was a very more strict, sit down, no joking kind of council. Completely different from the retirees having a good time, talking, want to shake their hands and talk about stuff. So I wasn't prepared for that, but I got a lot of great exposure. So one of the things that they talked about was even their frustrations as an organization. So they have this ongoing orchard project we spent a long time on. They're trying to get about 12 homes on project with just these fund lines. They got about 10. They went out of the way, like, well, Chip, we'll do everything, we'll do all the work, you just sign on the X and we'll take care of it. They got 11 out of 12. They couldn't get the last one. They couldn't even talk to their son, trying to use their products. They just could not get her on board, and this happens in their time constraints. But, sometimes it can happen. It can be extremely frustrating, especially when we talk about surrogate, all the background work, everything, the need, but getting it all done, and you get that one keystone person who just doesn't want to do it for some reason or another. And it could be past experience, maybe Forest Service back in the day did something they didn't like, and they have this, these tie-hards where they're never going to forget this.
Or whatever. Maybe it's not aesthetically pleasing for them. They want their huge bushes and then their vegetation all around their compound. They want
their privacy.
Yeah, they want their privacy. I mean, these people are out there for a reason, and sometimes they don't want their land to be managed.
I mean, it's just, you can't get all the people all the time. You're trying to do the greatest good. That's what. I'll see another couple things that kind of drop on Forest Service frustrations with their timelines, and I quote it as government time lapse. We're used to these slow on the wheels of the process. They're expecting things to be done quick. They're waiting. They're in the loop. They're waiting for Negro documentation to be going. So it's missing some of my documents.
No, I think if you click one more.
Okay. One more of this one?
Yeah. Click. Oh.
No, it's not.
Oh.
I had this phenomenally amazing map.
Just imagine it.
my big thing was all on pictures. It was this great map on the kind of visualization, and horse thief, everything. I didn't realize that Alpine has a great involvement, not only around the borders of our forest, but also involved in it. They're just little strips, you know, but still, it's these huge parks, and what we're looking for was when we were talking about that non-fed lands, fed lands cohesion, and our project Bring Around to. And then also their websites led me, I went down the rabbit hole, I was finding grants. There was a pie chart here, it had all the different top 5 organizations. So we had BLM, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, some other ones in these, so like, and here's the numbers that shows them, you know, Department of Agriculture's third's not bad, I'll take bronze. You know, we're putting a lot of these grants and funding for people. You know, we've got Department, only 1% would be as fine as super. And there's also, but then also this is very active. It was updated very quickly until like, were these grants still available? How many they got last year? What you need to do? Who was successful? And kind of like did all the background work which we were trying to do on this government-wide website. So some of the grants I looked up, and these were some of them, and like I was saying, so we have the National Fire Plan, Wildlife Harbor Earth Interference, Community Persistence. I think those basic plans of implementing these things for certain reasons. And then it was great because I have it on a piece of paper you want to look later. You can go to these websites, they'll tell you if it's still active, who does it, what you need to do, how do they get it, the work process. It just has everything you want if you were a person who didn't know how to start, and that way you go. Final thoughts right before this, let me say one more thing. So I really hit my expectations. You know, I was super frustrated in the beginning. I wasn't getting information. People weren't talking to me. I thought I was going to be making connections, talking to people over. They didn't want to call me, talk back to me. But this really grabbed what I was really trying to get out of this project. And I felt it was very well.
All right, conclusion time. We're almost at the end of our time. All right, I'll go to the class. Hearing all this stuff about NFL funds, about the time process, about communication, what's your general consensus of what you think this was about, or what happened? Ray, come on, Ray. Anything? Anything you noticed, anything that stood out to you?
Community.
Community.
Community, the farther you reach, if the more you're willing to reach out, that you can grab something and do different.
It really is. That's where the cohesive strategy comes in. And that's where it came in for me. Does it work? Yes, it does work. Is it hard? Yes, it is hard. It does take time. It takes effort. Is the product what we want? Not all the time. As we talked about, not everyone's going to be involved. But the product can be what we want. It can be something very beneficial to not only us as an agency, but our adjacent agencies and the people that live in these communities. So it is in our best interest to work together, to do these things, to go through these processes. As we showed, I mean, from the different perspectives, it takes a long time to come around. And you see people want this to happen right away. We understand it won't happen right away. And we have to communicate those things, that we are on the up and up. We are trying to get this to work. But you have to keep going. So for me, and what I found out from this is that it's a process like anything else. I've been working in the government for a while now. I understand it takes time. There's hoops to jump through, but you can make it work. It is totally in our means to make it successful, and people do. And a lot of times we see people when they retire, they take that wealth of information with them. So as people figure it out in the Forest Service, they leave, and then when someone tries to fill behind them and take it over, they're learning all over again. So a lot of people were asking us as we were compiling this, hey, can you send a copy of whatever you come up with so we can kind of understand what's happening? So this document is going to be sent down to all the fuels officers and all the people that we talk to. So that way we don't lose this information, that we continue to build off this information. Sarah, your closing thoughts?
I think for me, as a fuels fire manager, whether our documents say that we're responsible for private lands or not, if a fire starts on our land and it goes towards private property, people are going to blame us anyway. And so for me, it's reaching across those boundaries and making, those hypothetical fires easier for us to manage and doing what's right for the land across those borders and not having that hard line in the sand saying, no, this is where we stop doing land management, and having that communication and trying to be as successful as possible and having that open door policy as a public agency.
Sure. So just from where I started and how small I thought that the whole program was, and then seeing how vast and how big it all is, just going into public education and how we could help that community and actually inform them and be available if they do have questions, maybe on our end.
Speaking of questions, anyone got any? No, good. Go ahead.
This is specific to the Cleveland, but let's just say I'm a homeowner and I've got a project, and it's a great project, and let's just assume that Garth is sick today. Where would you send me for information, specifically on the Cleveland? Is there a website with a silver bullet or a number?
Oh, man.
Without just giving me Fillmore's personal cell.
Yeah, just contact him direct, yeah.
Stevefillmore.com.
I think Coach can touch on that from his experience.
So I talked to the fire safety councils who deal with us, and they can get you started on their websites. You know, that this will get started point about this, what you're looking for, we can put you in contact. So, I mean, that's what they're set up for. They're involved with the middleman between us.
Go ahead, right there first.
I have a question on the funding. So this is the annual funding that's available. I guess I want to know, where does it come from on the top? Is it something that we as an agency apply for, or is it just money that's available? You have X amount this year, and then you apply for it and you get allocated a certain amount based on the number of applications?
A lot of times what we've seen is that if you meet the qualifications, the money would be there. As far as how deep the money pit is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think, I can put you in contact with someone in the regional office, Jamie Tripp. She deals with this stuff. She's the one responsible for allocating this money, her and Rob Griffith. And so I can put you in touch with them to give you some more information about that.
But it really does seem, if you hit the criteria, the money will be there. I mean, it's not like they're getting, yeah, exactly. It's not like they're getting like tens of thousands of people trying to ask them for this money. It's hard to get this money. It takes time, it takes effort. So because of that, that kind of pares down the requests. So if you meet the requirements, you have a good chance to do it. Your question.
So,
Is this about the LMU better than
That's a statement.
I think we all recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of our biggest partner, CAL FIRE. And I was a little concerned as I saw this presentation about the difficulty. And so I guess I want to ask, who was the contact at CAL FIRE? What was the attempt?
I'm not sure, this was just, I didn't ask them to elaborate any further. I don't know what specific units they were dealing with, if it was down here in Southern California or Northern California. It was just multiple people that had mentioned that.
And I think it's very much at the local level. So I'm not sure, I can't
Right.
vouch for CAL FIRE,
Right,
the
it was-
higher positions.
Yeah, it was definitely at the local level, working with local cooperators.
Say, hey,
and not-
engine, whatever, we're gonna go do this. and
All right,
we'll
so
join us.
many of you know that there are contract fire protection here, and I'm a representative to see that we get things done, right? They are fantastic folks to work with, and they can be a pain. All right, so you need to know who to go to. And if we're offering at the engine or battalion level, because that's the face we see, that may not be the level to get what you want. So in Riverside and San Diego, San Bernardino, we want to go to the unit forester. And many of us know that they're doing some big projects alongside the federal partners at Lake Marina. And what's the private one in Pine Valley? Corte Madera. Right? So we know they do work together. And we're working with them at McCain Valley and Sunrise Field Break in Julian, Cuyamaca right now. So it's getting to the right person. It would be my message I'd like to send home.
No, you make a valid point, man, that's really correct. A lot of these people we talk to is up and down the state, all the region fund. And it goes back to really the network, the communication. That's what it really comes back. This is the main message, is working with these people, finding the right people to talk to, like you said, and making it work, because it can.
Well, now that I've played the adult, we can tell the CAL FIRE joke.
Oh, we're out of time for CAL FIRE jokes. That'll be all day. Any other questions? Fillmore's looking at me bad. Good? Okay? All right, we're done. Boss.
Very good.
Good game.
So, I want to say I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed with this document that you guys produced, for one. You guys, what?
Google it.
Yeah, I found it on the internet. I put my name on it.
I know a lot of it's the background stuff, but if you really start looking at, there's a lot more in this document than they were obviously able to put into the presentation. So that alone is a good start. So if anybody wants a copy, just let me know, and I'll be posting it online. And then I'm just like, what I was struck with the presentation was just, it's that whole thing with this group is that these group projects allows the students to dive into one specific subject. To just see where you guys started from and where you guys ended up. I'm going to be asking you guys questions about this stuff in the future. Or maybe not. But I'm really impressed with the depth of understanding you guys have, and you got to see that kind of like Aaron was saying. So, and I really do. I felt this was an important. I helped develop these tasks for these guys to do, and we on the Cleveland, we're somewhere around $3 or $4 million worth of grants and agreements to do this pass-through money. We're doing a lot more pass-through money, and as the program manager, it's something that's important to me. So I'm really glad that you guys were able to dive into this and see the importance of the national policing strategy. So very nice job. Well done. You're done now.
Barbecue time.
Barbecue. Before that, so we'll take a break, of course. We'll give you guys about, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So let's try to be here about 5 till. And then the next group, group 2, start your present, get you guys set up here. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Woo!